In the spring of 1917, the deserts and hills of the Middle East were quiet beneath a fragile sun, yet far from still. Behind closed doors in London, in offices heavy with maps and dispatches, the British government was drafting promises that would stretch across oceans and deserts alike. To the Arab leaders of the Hejaz, messages arrived carried on thin parchment, scented faintly of ink and oil. Britain spoke of freedom, of independence for Arab lands if they would rise against the Ottoman Empire, a foe that had held sway for centuries. The words were deliberate, measured, couched in the language of allies and destiny. Yet for the men who received them, they were a lifeline, a beacon of hope amid the uncertainty of war. At the same time, across the city, in rooms lit by gas lamps, another promise was taking shape. Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, composed a letter to Lord Rothschild, representing the aspirations of European Jews. Britain would support the establishment of a national home in Palestine, a homeland. The phrase was simple, legalistic, but heavy with consequence. The words carried across the seas, crossing continents and deserts, finding their way into the hands of men and women who had endured centuries of displacement and oppression. They read it with trembling fingers, a mixture of hope and disbelief. In the streets of Damascus and Mecca, Arab fighters moved cautiously, following orders from emissaries who had returned from meetings with British officers. They carried rifles, letters, and an invisible burden of expectation. The Ottomans still held forts and towns, but the British promise whispered of a future free from their rule. Each night, the desert air was filled with the clatter of camels and the distant echoes of artillery from Sinai and Palestine, and the men whispered about the lands they would govern, the cities they would enter as masters of their own fate. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem and Jaffa, Jewish communities listened for news, read foreign newspapers with care, and debated in hushed tones the meaning of Balfour's letter. They imagined the olive groves and ancient stone streets, the possibility of cultivating a homeland in a place their ancestors had never left entirely. They wondered how quickly this future could arrive, how the promise would manifest amid the turmoil of the war that still raged around them. Supplies were scarce, the summer heat pressed against stone walls, and yet their minds were alight with the vision of return, of planting trees and raising children under a flag they had never known. The British, for their part, moved cautiously. They negotiated with emissaries and spies, generals and tribal leaders, threading letters and telegrams through a labyrinth of secrecy and strategy. In Cairo, officials debated wording, worried that a misplaced phrase might ignite suspicion, delay armies, or undermine alliances. In the sands outside Aqaba, Arab fighters fought not only the Ottomans, but also the invisible pressure of expectation. Each victory, each village taken, seemed both a triumph and a reminder of the unseen strings attached to their fight. By the summer of 1917, these twin promises had begun to shape the land itself. Roads once quiet were clogged with movement, camels laden with supplies, men on horseback scouting distant hills. The desert nights were alive with whispers, laughter, fear. Arabs recounted the letters from London to one another, reading passages aloud by lantern light. Jews in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem spoke of returning families, of sending scouts to assess the land, of plotting irrigation channels and schools. Each believed in a future that had been assured, legally, morally, and finally by the authority of a distant empire. Yet the war did not pause for promises. The Sinai and Palestine campaigns pressed on. The Ottomans, though beleaguered, still resisted in stone cities and hidden valleys. Arab contingents advanced under the flag of rebellion, suffering thirst and sunburn, exhaustion and uncertainty. Allied officers delivered orders in clipped tones, speaking of tactics while the men beneath them fought, waited, and prayed for the British assurances that had summoned them into action. On the other side of the Mediterranean, Jewish communities in London and Paris interpreted Balfour's words with equal gravity. Emissaries dispatched to the region moved cautiously, measuring terrain, negotiating with local leaders, calculating the impact of every step. Ships carried men and supplies to ports still under Ottoman control, and each arrival was a small triumph, a signal that the promise could be transformed into reality. The heat and dust of Jaffa, the coastal winds off Haifa, the rhythm of life in Jerusalem all became the backdrop for planning, for the slow unfolding of what had been assured on paper. In villages along the Jordan Valley, Arab families endured the war's burdens, scarcity of food, fear of raids, the ever-present uncertainty of the future. They spoke in quiet voices about independence, about their own rulers, about the lands promised to them if they remained loyal to the British cause. The promise was more than words. It had become a measure of survival, a source of direction in the chaos of a collapsing empire. And yet, the same letters, the same promises, carried a silent tension. Both Arabs and Jews believed in legal entitlement to the land. Both clung to the idea of an assured future, written by an empire that seemed omnipotent yet distant, its decisions shaped by strategy, diplomacy, and global war. In Damascus, in Jerusalem, in the hills of the Negev, men prepared for a future that could only exist if the British maintained their word. Each sunrise brought new labor, new fear, new hope, and an ever-deepening awareness that history itself was being reshaped beneath their feet. By the autumn of 1917, the first battles had been fought under these intertwined promises. Arab forces captured towns and forts once held by the Ottomans. Jewish settlers and emissaries mapped the terrain, negotiated local cooperation, and sent detailed reports back to Europe. Both peoples lived in the shadow of expectation, watching British officers pass along roads and across deserts, awaiting the realization of what had been pledged. Yet the land remained contested, its future fragile, uncertain, and caught between two visions, both sanctioned by the same distant authority. Even as the war drew men and supplies into the arid plains and rocky valleys, the promises endured on paper. Letters and declarations, carefully drafted and sealed, carried weight far beyond their immediate recipients. They became instruments of action, of belief, of mobilization. Arabs spoke of freedom as they moved through towns emptied of Ottoman garrisons. Jews spoke of return as they walked streets where ancestors had prayed. Both measured every event, every day of waiting and struggle against the authority that had pledged them futures in the same land. The nights were long and heavy. Soldiers huddled under blankets, listening to the wind whip across deserts and hills. Civilians counted the days without certainty. Arab fighters kept watch for Ottoman counterattacks, eyes strained for movement along ridgelines. Jewish scouts noted troop positions and supply lines, hearts heavy with the knowledge that every moment of progress depended on forces far beyond their control. Both peoples endured hunger, thirst, and fatigue, yet neither doubted the authenticity of the promise that had summoned them into struggle. By the end of 1917, the landscape itself bore witness to the collision of these assurances. Towns emptied and refilled, fortresses changed hands, and the desert roads carried men and camels alike toward objectives both military and symbolic. Arabs spoke of independence as they took villages from Ottoman control. Jews spoke of homeland as they planned settlements, schools, and gardens in anticipation of the future they had been promised. Both measured the distance between reality and declaration, knowing that their faith in Britain was both lifeline and liability. The British, ever calculating, moved their own pieces across the board. Every message, every order, every letter carried a weight far beyond its surface meaning. Diplomats, officers, and emissaries negotiated with careful attention to timing, geography, and perception. Yet the very simultaneity of their promises meant that the land itself had become a stage for competing claims. Each group, believing in its legal right, advanced under the authority of the same distant empire, unaware that their paths were destined to intertwine in ways that would echo for decades. By winter, the desert winds carried more than sand. They carried stories, rumors, and the quiet, unspoken tension of promises made and lives altered. Arabs returned from campaigns exhausted, reporting victories and setbacks. Jewish communities adjusted plans in response to Ottoman resistance and British orders. Both peoples clung to the assurances that had directed their actions, that had justified sacrifice and endurance. The letters from London remained sacred in their eyes, yet the world around them moved with the chaotic indifference of war. In every town and village, along every hill and valley, the consequences of these twin promises were manifest. Arabs rebuilt communities disrupted by campaigns, counting the cost of freedom as soldiers returned with wounds, with grief, with stories of survival. Jews labored to understand the terrain, the logistics, the human and natural obstacles that lay between aspiration and reality. Each movement, each decision, each moment of waiting was informed by the knowledge that both peoples had been promised the same land by the same authority and that both were compelled to act on it. The first year after these promises was not marked by clarity, but by tension, by uncertainty, by cautious optimism shadowed by exhaustion. Arab and Jewish communities alike endured hunger, disease, and the cold desert nights. Soldiers and civilians carried their letters and instructions as talismans, reading and rereading the words that had drawn them into struggle. And in every wind-swept plain, in every olive grove, in every walled city, the presence of these promises shaped lives, ambitions, and actions in ways that were immediate, tangible, and unrelenting. The spring of 1918 arrived with a brittle clarity. In the Jordan Valley, Arab forces pushed forward, weary yet resolute, their uniforms dusty, their feet blistered from long marches over rough terrain. Letters from London had promised sovereignty, but sovereignty was not yet visible on the horizon. They moved from village to village, taking stock of abandoned Ottoman positions, counting men, rations, and wounds. Some nights the desert sky offered brief reprieve, a scattering of stars over tents and campfires. Men spoke quietly of the day when their lands would no longer bear the mark of foreign command, when their voices would shape laws and cities. Yet even as hope stirred, fatigue gnawed at the edges of resolve, and the desert reminded them daily of the fragility of all promises. In Jerusalem, the Jewish community measured time differently, through the rhythm of arrivals and departures, of emissaries and caravans bringing news from Europe. Maps were spread across tables, fingers tracing possible settlement sites. Men and women walked the streets in cautious anticipation, aware that the Balfour Declaration was not a guarantee, but a directive dependent on distant powers and ongoing war. They built modest structures, prepared gardens, discussed schools and hospitals. Each small action was an investment in a future written in ink but not yet realized on the ground. The city hummed with purpose, yet every night carried the same uncertainty, whether the land would remain accessible, whether the promises could withstand the weight of war and politics. The British, meanwhile, maintained a careful balance. In Cairo and London, officials exchanged telegrams and ciphered messages, reporting on Arab advances, on Jewish settlements, on Ottoman movements. Every dispatch carried coded optimism and coded caution. Officers on the front acted on orders, sometimes contradictory, always calibrated to maintain influence over both peoples while pursuing broader strategic objectives. The weight of diplomacy pressed on every decision, a reminder that the promises made were entangled with the machinery of war and empire. By midsummer, the campaigns had carved scars into the landscape. Villages bore the marks of occupation and retreat. Roads were lined with the debris of war, broken carts, discarded rifles, tattered tents. Arab fighters rested briefly in the shade of olive trees, sharing bread and water, speaking of the freedom they had been promised. Jewish settlers labored in the fields, testing soil and water sources, measuring sunlight, imagining harvests yet to come. Both groups acted on belief and obligation, each aware that the British word had set their movements into motion, yet neither fully certain of how those words would be enforced. Desert storms and mountain winds tested the endurance of everyone in the region. Soldiers returned with sores, blisters, and the lingering taste of dust in their mouths. Civilians moved cautiously, avoiding stray skirmishes, keeping children close, whispering about the letters that had drawn them into a future they could not yet see. Arabs and Jews alike learned the weight of patience, the slow calculus of survival, the need to adapt hope to the harshness of terrain and war. Every day was a negotiation with the elements, with circumstance, and with the fragile promises of an empire that had committed to both. In autumn, small victories and losses alike were recorded in diaries, letters, and reports. Arab leaders counted towns liberated from Ottoman control, mapped potential administrative centers, and debated the sequencing of campaigns. Jewish communities noted land purchases, migration patterns, and the establishment of agricultural settlements. The land became a canvas upon which both peoples painted the outlines of their aspirations, informed by promises whose simultaneous existence was invisible yet palpably present. Every sunrise brought labor, every sunset brought reflection, and the night carried both rest and tension, the quiet hum of anticipation under a vast and indifferent sky. Winter approached once more, and with it the ever-present shadows of scarcity and fatigue. In the Hijaz, Arab soldiers kept watch along ridges, eyes straining for movement across valleys scarred by previous battles. In Jerusalem and Jaffa, Jewish settlers monitored Ottoman troop positions, carefully recording what had been gained and what remained uncertain. Supplies ran low, illness struck quietly but relentlessly. Yet despite exhaustion, both groups maintained faith in the words that had summoned them into action. The British promises, though distant, remained the invisible scaffolding supporting months of struggle, sacrifice, and planning. Throughout 1919, the rhythm of expectation persisted. Arab leaders moved to consolidate control over areas they believed would be theirs, engaging in administrative planning, negotiating with local populations, and attempting to enforce order after the chaos of war. Jewish settlers pressed forward with agricultural projects, schools, and communal institutions, translating the Balfour Declaration from paper into daily practice. Both peoples measured the pace of progress in days, in miles, in the slow unfolding of tangible results, and both understood, in the quiet moments before dawn, that their futures depended on a fragile equilibrium maintained by the same empire that had drawn them into war with promises of sovereignty and homeland. By the end of that year, the land itself bore witness to dual expectations. Villages and towns were occupied, abandoned, resettled. Olive groves, fields, and orchards carried the labor of Arab and Jewish hands, each tending, each building, each waiting. The British continued to monitor, guide, and negotiate, aware that the simultaneous fulfillment of their promises was a delicate balance. The letters from 1917, carefully preserved and reverently read, had become instruments of action, shaping strategy, settlement, and governance. Both peoples moved forward under the shadow of the same pledge, their lives intertwined with the words of a distant power that had committed to both. In every valley and hill, in every desert plain and coastal town, the dual promises shaped not only military movements, but human experience. Arabs counted the cost of liberation, noting casualties, fatigue, and the slow work of civil administration. Jews counted the progress of settlement, the arrival of families, the cultivation of land. Both peoples measured hope and sacrifice against the weight of a letter from London. And in this landscape of expectation and endurance, the consequences of simultaneous promises became an inescapable reality, written into stone, sand, and memory, a testament to the power and peril of words forged in wartime. Spring of 1920 brought with it a brittle sense of possibility. The Ottoman Empire had collapsed, leaving a vacuum that Arabs and Jews both sought to fill. In Damascus, Arab leaders convened under tents pitched against the harsh Levantine sun, drafting the outlines of governments, councils, and armies. Each decision carried the weight of months of sacrifice, of blood spilled in deserts and valleys. Yet beneath their plans lingered unease. The British had promised independence, but independence required recognition, protection, and resources still controlled by the empire that had drawn them into war. Soldiers, their boots caked with mud and dust, listened to speeches and directives, hoping that the words they had followed would now translate into tangible authority. Across Palestine, Jewish settlers continued to plant orchards, build schools, and prepare infrastructure for a homeland that still existed largely in imagination and ambition. Men and women traveled on foot and by cart to assess land purchases, negotiate with local residents, and prepare irrigation systems. The promise of Balfour's letter had inspired them, yet reality pressed against their dreams. The land was rugged, the climate harsh, and the political situation volatile. Each day of labor, each row of saplings, each brick laid in a new building was an act of faith that the distant authority of Britain would honor what it had written. Arab fighters moved cautiously through the hills and valleys of the newly vacated Ottoman territories. Camels and horses carried supplies, while men carried both rifles and the heavy burden of expectation. Villages that had once been under Ottoman rule were now the focus of administrative planning, yet the ground beneath them remained uncertain. The British, stationed in Cairo and Jerusalem, monitored these developments, sending officers and advisors to guide, sometimes to restrain, sometimes to encourage. Each interaction carried the subtle tension of dual promises to support Arab sovereignty while also maintaining commitments to a Jewish homeland. By mid-1920, clashes of administration, influence, and expectation had begun to emerge. Arab leaders spoke openly of independence in councils and gatherings, marking towns with symbols of their emerging governance. Jewish settlers continued mapping, planting, and organizing communities, taking steps toward what they hoped would become a recognized homeland. Both peoples measured progress in concrete terms: the number of villages secured, the miles of cultivated land, the strength of local governance, and the readiness of the population for the authority that had been promised. Yet behind these measures lay a quiet uncertainty. Every success was shadowed by the knowledge that the British, who had promised both futures, retained ultimate power over implementation. The climate of the region mirrored the tension. Summers scorched the plains, winter winds cut across the hills. Scarcity of water, disease, and exhaustion haunted both Arab and Jewish communities. Men huddled around small fires at night, whispering about victories and losses, about the letters that had drawn them into months and years of struggle. Children grew up knowing only uncertainty, learning the rhythms of survival and hope intertwined, watching adults labor under the weight of promises written far away. In Jerusalem, the Jewish community worked to establish institutions capable of sustaining a future nation: schools, synagogues, communal kitchens. They mapped the land, prepared settlements, and coordinated with European emissaries. Each action was deliberate, each decision measured. The presence of British authority was both reassurance and reminder of vulnerability. The land could be cultivated, communities could be built, but only if the promise of Balfour's letter remained credible and enforced. Arab leaders, for their part, moved to consolidate political structures. Councils met in tents and makeshift halls, drafting decrees and organizing militias. They surveyed the terrain, counted the men and supplies needed to secure control, and planned campaigns to assert authority over territories vacated by the Ottomans. The British remained an omnipresent factor, mediating, advising, and sometimes intervening, their influence a silent but decisive hand shaping the possibilities for both peoples. By late 1920, the dual promises of Britain had created an environment of quiet, persistent tension. Arab and Jewish communities, both acting in faith and expectation, had carved out spaces of administration, settlement, and planning. The land bore the marks of their labor, but also the marks of conflict, both overt and subtle. Roads were maintained, olive groves tended, new structures erected. Yet in every town and village, the shadow of the other claim lingered. Each step forward was measured against the presence of the other, each act of planning constrained by the knowledge that Britain held ultimate authority. The human experience in this period was one of endurance and adaptation. Soldiers returned from patrols, exhausted, counting the cost of campaigns and skirmishes. Civilians continued daily routines, their labor and vigilance infused with anticipation and anxiety. The dual promises of Britain had created a world in which hope and fear were inseparable. Every sunrise brought labor, every sunset reflection, and the nights carried both quiet rest and restless calculation. The letters from London, once abstract, had become anchors for action, shaping lives, communities, and the landscape itself. By the end of 1920, the consequences of Britain's simultaneous promises were clear. Arabs and Jews both pursued futures assured to them by words written in distant offices, yet neither could fully realize their vision without the cooperation or restraint of the other. The land had become a stage for two overlapping destinies, each legitimate in its own eyes, each dependent on an empire whose interests were strategic, not moral. The war they had been drawn into to secure these promises had not yet ended, and the human lives shaped by that war moved forward in the shadow of overlapping hope and uncertainty. And so, in every town, field, and valley of Palestine, lives continued under the weight of promises made, shaping a future still unresolved.